This is a Fox News alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. Another brutal video unveiled by the terrorist army ISIS. This one purporting to show the beheading of a second American journalist. The murder of Steven Sotloff is prefaced with a denouncement of President Obama's bombing campaign in Iraq and followed by a promise of yet another execution to come. This, as the president's foreign policy plate is overflowing with dangerous challenges. ISIS terrorists in Iraq and Syria, along with that country's civil war. Al-Qaeda terrorists in Somalia. The near total dissolution of any semblance of order in Libya. And the Russian incursion into Ukraine. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Ed Henry is traveling with the president. He's in Estonia. Estonia, as Vladimir Putin boasts, he could take Ukraine's capital city in just 2 weeks. Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon with an American military strike against al-Qaeda forces in Somalia. Britt Hume with America's apparent loss of confidence in its leader's ability to handle foreign policy. But we begin with another example of ISIS savagery and the taunting of the president. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is here tonight. Hello, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Brett. Steven Sotloff's family seemed to be bracing itself for the worst news tonight. A spokesman said they're aware of the video and grieving in private.
The new video, called A Second Message to America, purports to show the execution of journalist Steven Sotloff. A masked terrorist, knife in hand, stands next to him, and the video ends with a horrific image of a head placed on top of a bloody body. While the intelligence community analyzes the video, the White House offered condolences, but no confirmation that it's genuine.
I'm not in a position to confirm the authenticity of that video or the reports at this point. Our thoughts and prayers, first and foremost, are with Mr. Sotloff and Mr. Sotloff's family and those who worked with him.
2 weeks ago, ISIS threatened to kill Sotloff at the end of the Foley execution video if the U.S. continued airstrikes against Islamic State targets in Iraq. Another hostage, believed to be British, is shown at the end of this latest video, and there is a warning from the executioner to those joining a U.S.-led coalition against ISIS. Quote, "Our knife will continue to strike the necks of your people." The apparent execution of 2 Americans at the hands of Islamic extremists known as ISIS or ISIL seem to give more credence to complaints from Capitol Hill that the president is too cautious. The State Department was asked whether it amounts to an act of war.
I'm not going to again put new labels on it. I think it's clear that we are concerned about the threat of ISIL to Western interests, to interests in the region.
Earlier, a former Pentagon official told Fox News that detailed and specific intelligence about the rise of ISIS was included in the president's daily brief, also known as the PDB, for at least a year before the group took large swaths of territory in June. The official said the data was strong, adding a policymaker such as the president, who often takes his brief electronically, could only conclude the situation was getting bad. Today, neither the White House nor the Pentagon denied the claim, emphasizing they were on top of the situation.
We've talked about ISIL for many months now, and as I've said before, we were very closely monitoring and tracking their progress, their growth, their development, well before they rolled into Mosul. So this is not an organization that we haven't been watching.
On whether the administration delayed acting on the Foley rescue, as first reported by the Sunday Times of London, the former Pentagon official said a heavily defended compound was identified and believed to be holding Foley and other potential captives. But the White House was hesitant and continued to ask for more intelligence. And within the last few minutes, we've had confirmation from the White House that the president has been briefed on the latest execution video from ISIS before heading overseas. Brett.
Catherine, thank you. More on this beheading at the bottom of the hour. We're still waiting for word on who was killed in last night's U.S. airstrike against an al-Qaeda-linked terror group in Somalia. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin is following developments from the Pentagon tonight.
Good evening, Brett. Pentagon officials are still awaiting evidence in the form of DNA or online chatter by al-Shabaab itself that last night's airstrike south of Mogadishu was successful.
U.S. officials cannot confirm the U.S. strike in Somalia killed the head of al-Shabaab, but the Pentagon confirmed he was the target.
This operation was a direct strike against the al-Shabaab network, specifically the group's leader, Ahmed Abdi al-Mohammed, also known as Ahmed Gadan. We are still assessing the results of the operation?
An operation carried out by airborne U.S. special operators, Predator drones, and manned aircraft that assisted with the targeting. U.S. Hellfire missiles rained down on a vehicle and an encampment used by al-Shabaab. Just last year, Gadan claimed responsibility for the attack on the Westgate Mall in Nairobi, Kenya, a prolonged suicide attack that killed 67 people. Following that attack, the U.S. sent a team of uniformed military advisors to Mogadishu to coordinate with the Somali military as they tried to fight al-Shabaab. Defenders of the president say this kind of stealth operation using U.S. military advisors and targeted drone strikes is in fact the military counterterrorism strategy that President Obama will be remembered for.
Absolutely, there's a strategy for our approach to the Middle East.
A series of persistent, targeted efforts to dismantle specific networks of violent extremists that threaten America.
Compared to President Bush, analyst Peter Beinart describes this fierce minimalism, quote, with rare exceptions, Obama only unsheaths his sword against people he thinks might kill American civilians. A recent example, U.S. AFRICOM stood by and watched as Libyan Islamist militias celebrated at the CIA residential compound in Tripoli, just weeks after the U.S. ambassador and embassy personnel were forced to abandon Libya as Islamist militias fought for control of the capital. No U.S. personnel were threatened and no U.S. warplanes were sent to protect the compound.
Meanwhile, the president has authorized the Pentagon to open a second drone base in Niger, expanding its network of surveillance bases in Africa, bases like the one used to target the head of al-Shabaab in Somalia last night. Brett.
Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. For the second time this year, President Obama is traveling to Russia's backyard to assure nervous nations of America's ironclad commitment to their security. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry is traveling with the president, coming to us tonight from Estonia. Hi, Ed.
Good evening, Brett. A quick stop here on the way to a NATO summit where leaders are expected to endorse a rapid response team of 4,000 troops in Eastern Europe that would deal with Russian aggression. Well, Russian officials responded today, firing back. They'll adjust their own military strategy amid fears in this region that this war of words could quickly become an actual hot war.
NATO has played a leading role and produced ample evidence to indicate that Russia has intervened in ways that grossly violate the territorial integrity of the independent nation of Ukraine. And that is something that the United States, along with all of our international partners, stands foursquare against.
It's no accident that on his way to a NATO summit later this week, President Obama is first spending the night in Estonia, just over 100 miles from Russia's border. White House officials added this stop to send a message to Russian President Vladimir Putin that the U.S. will stand up for tiny NATO allies like Estonia that could be in Russia's crosshairs next. Just days after the president's latest warning to Putin about his repeated moves into nearby Ukraine.
Russia is responsible for the violence in eastern Ukraine. The violence is encouraged by Russia. The separatists are trained by Russia. They are armed by Russia. They are funded by Russia. President Putin and Russia have repeatedly passed by potential off-ramps to resolve this diplomatically.
Unlike Estonia, however, Ukraine is not a member of NATO that would enjoy the Article 5 protections of military support from the U.S. and other member nations. And thus far, sanctions have done little to stop Putin's aggression.
I think Putin thinks he holds the high cards. He doesn't see anything in his way, and I think he's going to continue to press until he meets opposition.
That opposition is expected to be hammered out at the NATO summit in Wales later this week. Putin will not be there since Russia is not a member of NATO. There's been little diplomatic progress since his last face-to-face meeting in June with Mr. Obama in France on the sidelines of the festivities around the 70th anniversary of the D-Day invasion.
There are now reports that Putin told the president of the European Commission in a phone call, if I want, I could take Kiev in 2 weeks. Significant that Putin aides are downplaying the remark, but they are not denying it tonight. Brett?
Ed Henry live early Wednesday morning in Estonia. Ed, thank you. So what does all this turmoil around the world, and in some cases chaos, mean for President Obama? Senior political analyst Bert Hume is here tonight with some thoughts. Welcome back, Bert.
Thanks, Brett. Nice to see you. One way the Obama administration and its defenders have warded off calls for more aggressive action in this increasingly messy and dangerous world is by defining enemies as narrowly as possible. Thus, al-Qaeda became not a growing extremist movement, but a much smaller entity known as core al-Qaeda. Once Osama bin Laden had been killed, al-Qaeda was considered basically defeated or decimated, as some like to say. Al-Qaeda offshoots and affiliates might be attacked with an occasional drone strike, but were otherwise treated as secondary threats. The president's dismissal of ISIS, formerly known as al-Qaeda in Iraq, as a junior varsity operation is the best example, but you can hear echoes of the same thinking from defenders of the president's hesitancy to act aggressively in other areas. Intervention in Ukraine, even as indirect as sending weapons, is resisted on the basis that the bites Vladimir Putin is taking out of Ukraine are no threat to the U.S. homeland. The lack of urgency about a strategy to defeat ISIS in Syria is defended on the same basis. The president evidently is determined not to do anything stupid about these current crises. By stupid, he particularly means waging war. And his backers cite polls showing the public doesn't think much of the idea of war. Which raises this question. With the commander-in-chief downplaying the threats, why would people think anything else? Brett?
But what about the political power of this image of Steven Sotloff being beheaded just like James Foley? What does that mean here in the U.S.?
Well, the American military is at the moment kind of a sleeping giant, and so is the American public in terms of public opinion about conflict and war. ISIS may get some propaganda points out of these hideous atrocities among people who sympathize with them, who can't be all that numerous in this world. But I think the risk ISIS takes by doing these things and publicizing them in this way is it might awaken the sleeping giant. The United States military, it would take a while, it would be costly, could wipe out ISIS. It's not going to happen unless the public becomes aroused. But these kinds of atrocities might just have that effect.
All right, Britt, thank you.
You bet.
Up next, what another broken promise from President Obama could mean for the November election. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. Fox 17 in Nashville, where authorities are looking for 9 of the 32 teens who escaped from a youth detention center last night. The others have been recaptured. Many of the teens have multiple felony convictions. Fox 29 in West Palm Beach, Florida, where an inbound flight from LaGuardia Airport in New York was diverted to Jacksonville because of an unruly passenger. A witness says that a woman was trying to sleep on a tray table and then was struck in the head when the passenger in front of her tried to recline her seat. And this is a live look at Detroit from Fox 2, our affiliate there. The big story there tonight is the start of the city's bankruptcy trial. One of the city's lawyers said progress has been made, but the city is still in distress. Detroit wants to cut $12 billion in debt to about $5 billion. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.